The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
What would it take to prove the reality of near-death experience to the science-minded doubters of today? What if there were a book of documented events with compelling veridical evidence that NDEs are not just the reaction of the dying brain? Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our guest today is Robert Mays, an NDE researcher and fellow member of the IANS board. Robert and his wife Suzanne have studied NDEs together for over 35 years, although neither has had a near-death experience. They research the phenomenon of NDEs and shared death experiences, called SDEs, and the implications for understanding consciousness and neurological function. In particular, they study the phenomena connected with the out-of-body component of the NDE, especially veridical perceptions during NDEs and SDEs, and apparent interactions between the NDEer and the physical reality during their NDE. They also study the neurological evidence of the non-material mind during ordinary consciousness and the neurological mechanisms for an interface between the mind and the brain. Robert was our guest on the December 9th, 2013 show, and that show can be found among our past shows at nderadio.org. Robert, welcome back to NDE Radio.
Thank you very much, Lee.
I can't believe it's been a year and a half. Time does fly.
Right, yes.
Well, Robert, IANS is involved in two exciting projects right now, preparations for our Labor Day weekend conference in San Antonio, and also the translation of a Dutch book on veridical evidence of NDEs. So why don't we start with this exciting new book?
Right. There is, in November 2013, three authors, Titus Rivas, Annie Dervin, and Rudolf Schmidt, published a book in the Netherlands, and it has 78 cases of veridical perceptions and other verified paranormal aspects of NDEs. And when I heard about this, shortly after it got published, I asked Titus, the primary author, if they were going to translate it. And he said, well, they didn't have any plans to do that. And I said, I think it needs to be in English. And so I've been working with the three authors, primarily Titus, and trying to get a project to translate and publish the book in English, and that's what we're doing. We have IANS itself recently allocated about $4,500 to the project, and an IANS affiliate in the Netherlands, Netwerk NDE, which used to be called Merkava, put up €1,000 to get the foreign translation rights from the original publisher, and we had several board members donating quite a bit of money. And so as of when we launched this appeal for further donations, we had raised $9,200. We had estimated that we needed about $17,500. So we were about $8,000 short still. And so I think it was 2 weeks ago now, today, we launched an appeal, and we received quite a good response. And we're, I think, about right now, counting all the donations we've received, about $2,000 short of the $17,500.
Oh, that's really excellent. Robert, what do you hope to accomplish with 78 cases of veridical experience? How is that going to change the perception of NDEs?
Right. Well, the best evidence for what we feel, Suzanne and I feel, is really happening in the near-death experience it comes from these cases where the person's consciousness appears to have separated from the physical body, and the best evidence for that is where the NDEer sees something that they couldn't possibly have seen in their, from their physical vantage point. Even if they're not clinically dead, they still see things that they could not have seen. Usually they're unconscious, they're in an operation, or they're in a coma, but their brain is theoretically working okay. It might be under anesthesia. They might be in a cardiac arrest, and there are a number of cases like that, but they don't have to be clinically dead. And they will see something at a distance, or something that physically in the environment, but nobody could physically see it because it's up on a high shelf or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or they see something, behind a surgical drape and so on. So there's and how could they possibly have done that if the object or the person or the activity is at a distance? And so that more than the fact that they were in cardiac arrest is evidence that their mind has separated from the physical body, and the locus of consciousness is somewhere else. And so that's the importance of this. And there are a number of interesting variations of this which are even more evidential. One of the cases class of cases, and by the way, there were 78 cases in the Dutch version. There are going to be over 80 cases. They're putting in several additional ones. We don't know the final count, but it'll be over 80 cases in the English translation. Mm. But as a class of veridical perception, veridical, by the way, means it's accurate and it was verified. And so some of these cases we call apparitional cases, where the NDEer has the experience of traveling to see someone, and that person, and they know that they have been in the presence of this other person, but that person is at a distance, sometimes hundreds of miles away, and that person has the experience of waking up from sleep and seeing the dying person, the NDEer, right in front of them, and they communicate something. Mm. And then both parties report that this has happened, and it is, when it's checked out, it happened at the same time. Well, what this says is that the separation of the mind isn't just a subjective experience of the NDEer, but it's an objective reality that other people see. They see the person. They see the disembodied person, the non-material aspect of that person in their presence, and there's a communication. And in the Dutch version of the book, they had 4 cases of this, 3 of them from past centuries, actually, 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. And there was one case in the 1980s, 1988. It was Olga Gearhart case was, and I'll describe that in a bit. But and we have since found another one, and possibly another interesting variation of that. So there might be a total of 6 of these cases in the book, but certainly 5. And the new one that we found was a case, and I'll describe this one. There's a person that some of us in IANS know, Lauren Belge, Bellg. She is a critical care physician in Wisconsin, and she's about to write a book about her experiences called Near-Death Experience in the ICU, or Near-Death in the ICU. And one of her cases was a case where a woman was dying of cancer, I believe, and she had been estranged from her son. Her son really wanted to visit her before she died, and she refused because of what the son had done decades before. in harming the family financially and going to prison for it. And so she refused to have him come visit. Well, he was sitting in a bar quite a distance away, and thinking about his mother and crying because he wasn't able to go visit her. And then he sees her walking into the bar. And he's saying, well, what is this? She's coming here? And can she even be here? And he gets up and he's crying, gets up to go to her, and then there are people who are in the way, it's a crowded bar, and then she's gone. He looks and she's gone.
Yes.
Well, her experience was that she had a dream, quotes, dream, where she was in a bar, and there was her son, and her son was crying, and her son got up to greet her, and she got scared, and she woke up. And so this was documented and verified by Dr. Belch, and both parties confirmed, that is, the son confirmed, and the family members. So the woman told her family that she had this dream and saw her son, and he was in a bar, and he got up, and she woke up. And so they went to him, and he verified that he was in the bar, and he saw her and was crying, and then she disappeared. And so that was one of these cases of apparition that was verified. So anyway, those are the things, the evidential things that are really important in this book. And then there are lots of other classes of cases of paranormal, like miraculous healings and the onset of psychic abilities, and there's other forms of communication, of receiving information from veridical information from a person that you meet, in the deceased person that you meet in your near-death experience, and so on. So there's a number of cases, and it's really a very powerful book in terms of evidence. The skeptics can go and say, well, Pam Reynolds' case, we can say that she wasn't really under anesthesia at the time, and she heard things, and she saw things, and she just imagined having heard the sound of this drill, and so on, and make those arguments. But you can't, those are very specific arguments for that particular case. It doesn't apply in other cases. And there's some that are even evidentially much stronger than Pam Reynolds, or Maria Hsu is another one that's a vertical case that is disputed, and so on.
And cited all the time. Why do you suppose that it's come down to Maria and Pam Reynolds in most of these discussions, when there's been so many cases of just like the story you just described? I've met many people who've had that experience of not even through near death, but just going to sleep, and suddenly they're in another state, right, visiting with someone who can see them.
Right.
And in fact, this happened to my brother when he was in college. So it's not that unusual an experience. Why is it that there have been so few? I mean, why hasn't a book like this been written already?
I don't know. One of the difficulties is, well, first of all, the criteria that they have, the authors have, for including a case is that it is verified by an independent investigator. In other words, third-party verification. You're right, there are hundreds of these cases, but for the most part it is, I checked with so-and-so, yeah, he did see me, or, I saw this event, and yes, my wife said that that's exactly what happened in the waiting room. But there was no third-party verification of, interviewing the wife and interviewing the NDE and so on. And so it's less. It's interesting, though, that more of these cases are coming about. There's a doctor in Oklahoma who has a very familiar name with people who are familiar with NDE, well, these cases. His name is Lloyd A. Rudy, Dr. Lloyd Rudy. Well, that Dr. Lloyd Rudy is different from the Lloyd Rudy that had a very distinct veridical case. In other words, there's two Dr. Lloyd Rudys, but
yes.
This is weird. But anyway, this second Lloyd Rudy wrote a book called Good, Clean, Dark. It's a book of NDEs among African Americans, and it's just wonderful. And in it, there's one of these veridical cases, and there's one of these apparitional cases. Well, what we have to check out to be but it appears to be a very interesting variation of an apparitional case. And they're just astounding. And there are a whole bunch of other NDE stories. It's just amazing. So these cases are coming out, and this was checked by the second Lloyd Rudy. So we're hoping that we can include his cases in the book as well. We have to go through the process of checking them out.
Yes.
In any case, why is it that there are these cases there? Well, first of all, they've not been independently verified, and that was one of the things that Susan Blackmore brought out. She had a wonderful case of a veridical perception that she put at the end of her book, Dying to Live, very skeptical book about near-death experiences, and she says, this is a great case, but there's no verification. There's no verification that this major, in World War II, had this accident and saw this and saw that, and he went and he verified that the serial number on the Jeep that he saw was exactly that, and that the guy that was resuscitating was bald, but you couldn't see it, except from the top and so on. And she said, that's great, but it's not been verified, therefore forget it. And the skeptics tend to say, okay, well, so-and-so looked at these cases, quote, cases, and they found them just hallucinations, and then they dismiss them. And that's basically the way the skeptical people and physicians in general, they take what another person's analysis has been, which was flawed generally, or questionable, and
yes.
and then they say, well, all of these cases we don't need to look at them because they've been shown to be hallucinations. Come on. Well, I don't need
along those same lines, I'd be remiss not to mention last month's Atlantic article in which that attitude came through. Of course, the Maria and the Pam Reynolds story were mentioned, and you were also quoted in that article. What did you think about it?
Well, I thought that was a very balanced article, and I don't at all fault anyone who is still skeptical in the pure sense. That is to say, I don't really quite believe this yet, so I'm skeptical, but not being dogmatically skeptical. And Gideon Litchfield, the author there, I think is really quite open to looking at the evidence, and he was open to our proposal that this could be tested. That is to say, the fact that the non-material mind could influence the brain and influence neurons. And so I thought it was a very fair article, and actually I hope that there is some skepticism and balance in reporting near-death experience research, because you don't want to become over sensationalized and really overstate the case, because but I think we have a really good case now, particularly
yes.
with these cases in this book, and that's one of the things about a lot of the issues with the these cases. They were isolated. They were quote anecdotes, because they really were. They were isolated stories, but they were isolated. Nobody put them together. Nobody correlated them. And saying, well, hey, wait a minute, it isn't just this story over here, but there's this class, there's a number of these cases here. So it isn't an anecdote. It is a kind of phenomenon, a kind of variation or interesting aspect of the near-death experience that can sometimes happen. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes happens and provides evidence and it's credible evidence because it's repeated across several cases across centuries.
Mm. Has there been any effort to differentiate between the NDE and the OBE in terms of veridical evidence that can occur from either one? In other words, the body doesn't have to be damaged necessarily for someone to leave the body and go somewhere else and see something that can't otherwise be explained.
Right, and this is an area that still needs work. Because there isn't, people who intentionally induce an out-of-body experience. I mean, there are spontaneous cases of near-death, of out-of-body experiences which rise to the level in terms of measuring on the Grayson scale, Grayson NDE scale. They are NDEs, even though the person was just asleep, even though the person was just meditating. And so near-death needs to be put in quotes, or at least taken with a grain of salt, because you don't have to be near-death to have what amounts to a near-death experience. But there's a difference between, non-intentional and intentional OBEs. And the work to verify intentional OBEs, that is, in self-induced OBEs, it needs more work, and I'm not aware of really clear cases of veridical perception, and I think that has to do in the theory that Suzanne and I have, is that it has to do with the degree of separation of the mind from the physical body. In other words, when there's a shock, or when there really is whatever it takes for the mind really to separate, like you're in depression or you're meditating, but you're ready, in quotes, for some reason, in some way, then your mind really does separate, and then the perceptions are really clear. Whereas self-induced OBEs may not be veridical, and even spontaneous OBEs may not be veridical. Susan Blackmore, to bring her case up again, she had a very interesting out-of-body experience, and it was really interesting. But there are aspects of that experience that say to me that she wasn't really separated fully from her physical body, and her perceptions were all wrong. They were all not veridical. And that probably set her on the way towards skepticism about this.
There's certainly been a lot of stories about various spy agencies of various countries investigating the possibility of, spying on one another through out-of-body experiences.
Oh, yes. Yeah, remote viewing. And that's different. Remote viewing is a kind of clairvoyance. It is clairvoyance. But it is not, people who do remote viewing, now there's probably variations among different remote viewers, but people who do remote viewing generally say that they do not leave their body. They just see something. Their mind moves somewhere, beyond space and frequently also beyond time, going back in time or going forward in time. And they're in a different place, but they're not separated from their physical body. So I tend to look at those as a different kind of phenomenon.
Do you think once it's proven that veridical evidence can be obtained, that the skeptic's next position will be, well, you didn't really have an out-of-body experience. What you had was what these guys have been doing, for the government?
Oh yeah, remote viewing. Well, yeah, that's interesting too. It's just that's not the experience. The remote viewer has a totally different experience from the description of what they experience versus what NDEers experience. NDEers really feel that they are out of their body, and they look back at their body and they see it and they're not interested in it. And, so they, first of all, that many of them see their own body and they see it being resuscitated or see it, in whatever physical condition it is in. And then they're gone. And they can sometimes look back at their body, while they're in the tunnel or something like that. But that's, their experiences, it's separated. And so why are we saying, okay, well, it's just remote viewing? Well, when that's not the phenomenon.
Right. Now, the author of the Atlantic article got almost all his material from being at our last year's conference in Newport Beach, and we've got another one of these meetings coming up in San Antonio. Maybe we could take the last couple of minutes to talk about that.
Yeah, that's well, there's the conference is going to be have two sessions. That's one of the things that's new about this conference. And the first session is going to be devoted to healthcare education, research, and science. So it's some of the more interesting aspects of the people who are working in healthcare, working with people who have NDEs. People are trying to educate the military or doctors about NDEs. Those are the first two parts. And then, of course, the research. And I will be giving Suzanne and I will be giving a talk on veridical perceptions and the importance of this work in this book in that session. And science in general is how does NDEs apply to consciousness, our understanding of consciousness, our understanding of the true nature of reality. And so that's just the first day. And then we have Bruce Grayson is going to be the keynote speaker for that day and the next day. And then we have Evan Alexander as a keynote speaker, Anita Morjani, and also, so those are the three keynote speakers, and then a very special plenary presentation by Suzanne Giesman, who is a medium. And mediumship is one of the after effects that we're finding out now, researchers are finding out, after effects of the near-death experience. And so mediumship needs to be studied, and she's a top-notch medium. And also a special presentation actually two presentations by PMH Atwater. And those are all in the general session. And so it's going to be a really great conference. And you can go just to what we call HERS Day, the Healthcare Education Research Science HERS Day, which is Thursday, and or the general session, which is Friday, Saturday, and half up till noon or lunchtime Sunday, and then in the late afternoons, including on Sunday, all of Sunday afternoon, there are workshops, really great workshops, and this is all on our website, and you can go to it, and I'll give you the shortcut to it. It's NDEconference.com. NDEconference.com, all one word, all lowercase, whatever. NDEconference.com. And that goes to the website of the conference, and then from there you can register if you're interested. And there's an early bird and member discount, so it's really and you could, it's less right now if you sign up now. And you can come to either HERS Day or the general session or all of it, or you can come to individual mornings. So there's a lot of options, that people can choose from.
Great. Robert, if someone listening would like to get in touch with you, how might they do that? Do you have an email address for them?
Oh, yeah. My email address is Mays, M-A-Y-S, at IEEE.org. That's IEEE.org.
Very good. Well, Robert, I'm afraid we're out of time for today. I want to thank you so much for being on and talking about this really exciting book. I can't wait to get a copy of it in English. My Dutch is very weak, to tell you the truth. My thanks to Robert Mays for today's edition of IANS NDE Radio. For more information about IANS, our services, news about near-death experience, and of course news about the conference, please go to our website at iands.org and join us next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. Thanks for listening.